John Stanley, Reel 1. Where were you born, Mr. Stanley?
A town called Posen, P-O-S-E-N, Posen in Poland.
Which year was that?
In 1919, I was born just about a day before the Polish state was established.
What did your father do for a living?
I think he was a wholesaler in a big business in the town, and was a rather important local notary of some sort. It's a bit dim as far as I'm concerned, but he must have been quite important because the Poles arrested him straight away.
For what reason?
Because he was an important German citizen.
I think you were telling me that your father had served in the German Imperial Army.
Yes, I think he served in the 68th Infantry Regiment. He was wounded at Verdun, and I think he got the Iron Cross at Verdun. He was commissioned, and he considers himself much more a Prussian than a German.
And were your parents Jews?
Oh yes, very much so.
Practicing Jews?
Yes, yes.
And were you a believer yourself?
I practiced the faith, if you like to call that, until I was 16 or 17, more so perhaps than my parents. I observed all the regulations of the faith very faithfully.
Where were you educated?
A small town called Brandenburg, which is really the heart of Prussia, about 30 miles this side of Berlin. And it was a military school I attended. It had been founded about 300 or 400 years, no, 1520, 1530. And the local nobility, or the people who could afford it, used to send their sons there to get a good education, in classics in particular.
With the aim that their son should go into the army?
Well, not necessarily the army, but it was a traditional background for all Prussians to have a classical education. I think the majority were nobility anyway, so some went into the army and some looked after the estate.
So how old were you when you completed your education?
16. 17, I beg your pardon, 17.
To do what?
I left school and did an apprenticeship in a textile factory in Brandenburg. And I finished my apprenticeship, and I got the sack of it at the same time because the factory was being taken over by a German firm, and they would not employ the Jews any longer.
Now, have you any recollections of the Nazis coming to power?
When we say power, yes, of course, 1933 was the beginning. January 30th, 1933, I was still at school, and we had to go on marches. And my father somehow made me go on these marches, and I was too young to object. But we did see the people being arrested in the streets. There was a slight measure of resistance on the part of the communists, but on the whole it was so gradual and was so well received by the population that it did not make much of an impression on me.
What were these marches that your father wanted you to go on?
Well, they had, Goebbels initiated a different sort of march every 4 or 5 weeks in aid of this and aid of that, to commemorate battles and to commemorate liberations of this or that part of Germany from the social democratic regime at the time. They were really there in order to involve people in the new government. Swastikas were a little bit rare in those days, and to start off with, Hitler only got into power together with the German nationalists. The German nationalists who in part supported the old emperor, the Kaiser. And after 2 or 3 years were entirely eliminated. But whilst they still had the national German so-called nationalist tendencies, I felt my father probably identified himself more with the nationalists than with the Nazis. It only dawned on him much later that that was only really a trick to get people's support.
So was your father a supporter of the Nationalist Party?
Not really, not a supporter, no, but he felt that it stood in a way for the past, and he thought somehow the nationalists would bring the Nazis to heels very soon. It was, of course, the other way around very quickly.
Did you ever discuss politics with your father?
Oh, I was much too young to understand politics when I was 13. I was brought up in a situation where one wasn't really told what was going on. With hindsight, of course, I realized what went on, but now, talking about it now, quite impossible to say that a child of 13 would have in any way any idea what goes on. Afterwards, there were only 2 or 3 papers, and they all printed the same stories. There was no opposition.
Were you obliged to join the Hitler Youth?
Of course not. Not at all. At first, they didn't, all my classmates, not all joined, I think it was voluntary. But one by one, over the first 18 months, they all joined until the whole lot became members. And it made things rather difficult for me, because none of them would talk to me when there was anybody else around. On their own, sometimes they spoke to me, but I was brought up in Coventry practically for years.
Apart from this, what other discrimination did your family start to suffer?
Well, there's no physical, there were no physical attacks against members of the family. It was just gradually more and more of the customers my father had decided to restore their support from him because they were afraid that others might find out he bought from a Jewish firm. So on the economic front, there was a measure of discrimination and elimination, if you like to call it, which didn't really culminate into any active violence until 1938, when all Jewish shops were just ransacked, looted, and some of them burned to the ground. There was a real sort of a calm during the Olympic Games when they froze all the activities to be sure that when the foreigners came to the country, they would leave Germany again with the best possible impressions.
So you didn't have Nazi Party members outside your father's business to enforce a boycott?
There was a one-day boycott, I think, on probably in April 1933. Just for one day. My memory is a bit hazy now. What was the reason for it? It did work just once, and as it never happened again for so many years, people felt it was a flash in the pan. Wrongly.
Did your parents ever think of getting out of Germany?
Vaguely, but they were very reluctant to leave their own country. And the main reason, of course, was that it was quite impossible to transfer any cash and any bank accounts, any possessions other than the things that you lived with. There was a complete embargo on the movement of currencies. So they had no choice either to stay or to leave as beggars.
And what about their children?
I had a sister who married in 1934, and she moved to Poland. And she was out of the picture entirely. Although she had a very, very thin... She survived the war in the ghetto in Warsaw, one of very few people who survived. But apart from her, she was much older than I am, really. So we hardly had an adult relationship. So just myself, I was the only child in the family, and my parents were much too concerned with day-to-day business, rather than to look to the future, and decide what I had in long term, and how to get out.
And how did you come to leave?
Well, I tried very hard to get out by all means, any means possible, and it occurred to me that I could get to New South Wales much better from here, from this coming to England, and make an application here than from Germany. So I travelled over on a tour ticket in order to arrange my immigration to Australia. Fortunately, before I went, I had discovered a line of the family who lived in Liverpool for the last 70, 80 years, and got in touch with them, and they looked after me when I arrived here in 1938. And as a result, I didn't go to New South Wales, and I stayed here.
Did you change your name on coming to Britain?
No, I changed my name when I joined the parachute regiment.
What was your surname originally?
Hans Schwarz.
F-R-A-N-Z.
Black. S-C-H-W-A-R-Z. Hans nearest to John.
Now, when the war broke out, what were your own personal feelings?
The time had come to get my own back somehow. After I had suffered, I was in a concentration camp for a while, and I had a feeling I'd never see my parents again. An instinct, of course, an instinct only. And when the war started, it was somehow the day that I'd been waiting for. It took about 4 or 5 months before I could join the forces. But when I did, I felt I was in the right surroundings in order to do something about Hitler.
When did you go to the concentration camp?
1938. I came here early 38 and had to go back again because I didn't have a proper entrance visa. So in between, we're talking about September 38, the Munich crisis, when I left here, at the height of the Munich crisis, and everybody begged me to stay, become an illegal immigrant. And I decided that unless my papers were in order, I would start on the wrong foot. So I went back, and between September and December, there was so-called Kristallnacht on the 9th of November 1938, when the Nazis just went on the rampage because some minor official had been killed in Paris, and they smashed all Jewish shops, locked people up, and what have you. And I was put away for about 6 weeks then, and within a week of leaving Oranienburg concentration camp, I came here.
What was it like in Oranienburg?
Well, so many other people would tell you, and so much has been said about it. It wasn't a holiday camp, and there was much physical abuse and torture to which I was subjected myself once or twice. I will not talk about it. Many other people who had exactly the same treatment didn't come back, didn't come out, or their minds have been affected. I only say I'm rather glad it did not affect me in any way whatever. I haven't acquired a warped personality. I've forgiven them.
So you were sent there just
Not
for
forgotten.
being a Jew?
I beg your pardon?
You were sent there just for being a Jew?
Absolutely, yeah. I met one of my guards once during the war. I met one of the guards from the concentration camp once during the war. We were in a little town in North Africa, in Algeria, and the trainload of German prisoners of war being taken away or going towards Algiers, and we were on the way to Tunis in the airborne regiment. And as we stood there talking to these Germans, some of them spoke English, of course, I noticed one of them in the back in the compartment there, and I recognized him straight away as the chap from Oranienburg. And I told my mates, and they said, right, let's get the guards and get him out. Well, I felt a bit hesitant. I don't know what made me stop. I said, well, I'll just talk to him. So I opened the door and went in, one of those corridor trains, on the right side, I think, old-fashioned French corridor trains. Strangely enough, we used to travel in cattle trucks, and these Germans had proper third-class compartments, but no matter. And I said, you, I know you, and he went somewhat white in the face. He recognized me as well. I said, I know you, you're Spindler or something. I'm not. I said, I know you are. So he started to sweat. My mate said, well, let's get the guards and take him away. I said, no. It makes me sick. So I walked away. I felt like I couldn't face it.
So did they leave him alone?
Oh, yes. After all the others, you see, my friends didn't speak German anyway in the regiment, from my company. So it was the end of it, but I felt somewhat, in retrospect, rather pleased that I didn't hand him over. Besides, what could I have done with him? I had no authority to arrest him. I couldn't shoot him. I just came to face to face with the past after something like 5 years.
How had he behaved towards you?
He,
Yes,
well, in a camp,
yes.
he was a bastard. He used to go around with a whip. Yeah.
Now, I'd interrupted the narrative with asking you what your attitude was towards the outbreak of the war. Can you tell me how you came to be in the British Army?
Well, I volunteered just right early as soon as the war started, and it wasn't until Christmas, I have to say, that the War Office really acknowledged my letters. I must have had a flood of applicants from people who were in the same situation as myself. And then, I think in January, they said I could join up in February. And I got my papers, and I was interviewed in St Albans in the recruiting centre, and I started my army career in Richborough, on the Kent coast.
Which year was
Pioneer
this?
Corps.
Which
Richborough.
year?
1940.
And so you were just directed to the Pioneer Corps, were you?
Yeah.
And what type of work did you do for them?
Well, disappointingly, there was no specific task at that time. We just had to we were trained, first of all, for about 2 or 3 months, I would say. Can't quite remember. And then we put up huts, Nissen huts, and built huts in northern France in several places. We went over what you call the BEF, I would say, and near Rennes, Bretagne, and several other places. I think there were 4 or 5 other companies of German Jews in the British Army then, in France, very carefully looked after by the British authorities.
So, how did you come to be in the paratroops?
Well, I tried for years to get out of the Pioneer Corps, and it didn't really work. But in 1940, early 42, they asked for volunteers for the parachute regiment in my particular company, Pioneer Company. So I went for an interview to London, and I think there were 200 people there at some large hotel, and they picked out 50, and there was another interview, and out of the 50, they accepted 20, and I happened to be one of the 20. God knows why they picked on me. It was the most secure interview I've ever come across.
In what way?
Well, the chap called Major Landers, he was a legend in the parachute regiment, really. He was a pioneer of parachuting. He asked me whether I had a classical education. I admitted to it. He said, "What did you read in Latin?" So I explained to him I'd read Caesar. He said, "Caesar or Caesar?" I said, "Caesar." Have you read Cicero? I've read Cicero. Have you read Cornelius Nepos? No. Have you read Coriolanus? No. All right, thank you very much, he said. And out I went. I said, my God, what is this all about? Well, I passed. And I asked him some 8 months later, I said, why is it so important, sir, whether I have read Cornelius Nepos or not? Well, he said, I could never get through it, no one of you could. He was killed, he was shot down in Sicily, by the way.
How did you find the paratroops? Did you find it tough?
Oh no, I was very fit. I mean, I used to specialize cross-country running before I joined the regiment. And the training was tough, admittedly, especially the induction, which was a famous parachute induction course where you had to run march 7 miles, 50 minutes with full equipment. 7 miles, 50 minutes, full equipment. Doesn't sound much, but it was. I think we were half dead when we got there. Full equipment really meant that you have to carry 2 machine guns in a section, all the ammunition, and anyone who fell out had to be carried. So the whole section was penalized. If 10 of us set out and 9 arrived, we failed. So we had anybody who couldn't make it We had to get him there somehow. Fortunately, nobody fell out. But it was tough, yes. That was part one of the physical training course at Hardwick near Chesterfield. And the second part of the training course was at Ringway in Manchester.
This was the actual parachute jumping, was it?
Yeah.
Now, jumping ahead to 1944, what unit were you in at the time of the Arnhem?
Still the same unit, 21st Independent Parachute Company.
And can you recollect how it was first broached to you that you were going to go on this operation?
We were on standby for several weeks in Oxfordshire, and the Arnhem operation was really one out of three. The first idea was that we would drop at Rambouillet on the Seine in August, and that was cancelled. The next one was that we'd drop somewhere on the Albert Canal, and that was changed. We knew that we were going to go somewhere into that area. Then we were told that the 1st British Airborne Division would land at the Albert Canal, at Nijmegen, De Waal, and Arnhem. And then it was changed again. Instead of having 3 brigades, we have 3 divisions, which meant the British 1st Airborne Division would do the northern job at Arnhem, and 2 American divisions would jump at Eindhoven and at Nijmegen. That would be the 87th American and the 101st American Airborne Division. So we knew something was going to happen. We didn't know when. We were on standby for months, really.
It sounds as though quite a lot of information was given you about the operation.
Yeah.
What rank did you hold at that time?
I was a private.
How did you and your comrades react to the news that this was coming off?
Well, we were very eager after we'd been back from Italy for 9 months. And we had done nothing but training and doing exercises with the Americans and the RAF and all sorts of places. And we were getting a bit fed up. And after all, we were disappointed that on D-Day, the 6th Airborne Division had been used instead of the 1st. We felt let down. This inactivity was difficult to cope with. And at last, they said, now the time has come, Operation Market, I think it's called Market, would take place after all, and we took off.
Operation Market Garden?
Market Garden.
What kind of preparations did your unit make for the operation?
Well, we had to do all the usual paraphernalia. Ours was a specialist unit. It was really not the 21st Parachute Company, it was a 21st Parachute Pathfinder Company, since we had special equipment to bring gliders in or other airborne divisions at a certain place at the right time. At night, we had special infrared lights, and during the daytime we used colored panels usually laid out on the ground, which helped the pilots to release the gliders or the airborne troops in a certain position, allowing for the wind direction. We used to get there, it's at Arnhem I should say, but 4 or 5 hours before the division got there. That was our normal routine, to be there well ahead of the normal combat units. So the provisions that were made were no different from what we'd done throughout the schemes and exercises which took place in the UK prior to the real thing in 1944.
What kind of weaponry did parachute troops have at that time?
We had, in the section, we would have a Sten gun, we have a light 2-inch mortar, we have a sniper, we would have the normal issue of ordinary 36 percussion grenades and special phosphorus grenades, number 38, and Very pistols, marking equipment, that sort of thing.
What was the opinion of you and your comrades about the stem? Were you happy with it?
Oh yes, provided you keep it clean. Not very accurate at over 50 yards, of course. It was really a psychological weapon. We felt the noise was more important than hitting a target.
Did you in those days have any kind of bulletproof protection?
None at all.
Now, can you take me step by step through the operation as it affected you personally?
I'll try. I think we took off about 8 o'clock in the morning from Burford in Oxfordshire. And 2.5 hours later, it was a Sunday, we landed in Oosterbeek in Holland, near Arnhem, about 4 or 5 miles east of Arnhem. It was a lovely morning, and as we came down, we could hear the church bells ringing. And as we got to the ground, it was a routine drop and didn't lose anything. All our containers arrived in good order too. We had some containers, reserve equipment. And we set ourselves up in the wood very, very close to the first DZ, the dropping zone. And we weren't very far from the HQ dropping zone where Major Wilson, our commanding officer, spotted some Germans, and one of the Germans was firing at him. So in a typical 5th Hussar manner, he walked up to them and started to shout at them, "What the bloody hell do you think you're doing, firing at British officers?" And they put their weapons down, and he said to one of the corporals, "Arrest this man and take him away." And that was it. They were firing at him as he came down, you see. After all, they were having a picnic or something in a field, and suddenly Count Page was coming down and went their own. So they were a bit elderly, I must admit. They weren't young, but still, I thought it was a typical British officer. So what the bloody hell do you think you're doing, firing at British officers? I'm not sure they've been recorded before.
You witnessed this, did you?
Yes, I was only a few hundred yards away. We were amazed. I mean, we could have wiped them out anyway by the time we got to the ground.
Could you hear what the Major was saying?
Yes, I could hear him. Major Wilson, yeah, Bob Wilson. Or they called him Boy Wilson. He was in the First World War. He was, I think he won the MC somewhere in Cambrai or something like that.
So he just used sheer psychological pressure?
Absolutely. The Germans were really frightened of him. He didn't even pull his revolver.